Hello and welcome back to, guess where? Ironbridge, right on the banks of the River Severn. And I've got myself a slightly better angle, as you can see some canoeists flowing by in the background. And I'm reading from my book yet again, Chasing the Impossible, and the Sword of Damocles. And I've already read this chapter a couple of days ago, but I promised myself I would read it again. And it's an incredibly long chapter. And I'm going to forgive myself, a couple of stumbles and bumbles and mistakes along the way. This is a very personal chapter, and as the sweet bells of St. Luke's chime us in to the beginning of this video, I'm going to be reading it from this book. You can't see me reading it, but we're by the River Severn in beautiful Ironbridge, so who cares? Oh, it's 12 noon. I hope you can hear the bells. Beautiful, aren't they? Shit, missed the last one. Sorry about that. Right, Subbuteo football with Mes Un Club. Barcelona 0, Liverpool 0. Liverpool's semi-final first leg trip to FC Barcelona's famed Camp Nou stadium on the 5th of April 2001 was their most momentous and indeed important European Cup tie in 4 years, and since that horror-strewn debacle in the Parc des Princes in Paris, home of Paris Saint-Germain. On that occasion, a Roy Evans managed Liverpool were heavily defeated, and it could have been far more on a disastrous European semi-final night. 4 years later, Gerard Houllier had built a far more robust defensive side that also had pace and attacking threats through the English trio of Emile Heskey, Michael Owen and Robbie Fowler. Defensively, Houllier had recruited Marcus Babbel, Sami Hyypiä and Stefan Henshaw to form a solid defensive unit alongside Liverpool native Jamie Carragher. So it was no surprise that Houlier's Liverpool battled here to a 0-0 stalemate in the magnificent cauldron of the Camp Nou, and the 90,832 lucky enough to say that we were there. For this first leg cup tie was a stalemate. The Camp Nou was as glorious as it had been in my dreams, and although watching the game from the very last row of this magnificent history-filled footballing arena was akin to watching a faraway game of Subbuteo, it was a magnificent joy nonetheless. The all-in-white Reds of Liverpool smothered an underwhelming Barcelona in their traditional blue and red half shirts, not that you could pick out these intricate details 1,000 miles from the playing surface. The last row of the top tier after the steep hikes up the gantry and walkways of the Camp Nou is a long way from the pitch, but that's getting ahead of ourselves. The Reds of Liverpool were akin to the all-white of Real Madrid, Barcelona's fiercest rivals, but the game as a whole never lived up to the hype or indeed the Real Barca comparison either. But that again is getting ahead of ourselves. But what is clear and will remain clear at the denouement of this brief trip back in a time machine is that Liverpool battled, smothered and dare I say bored Barcelona into a 0-0 draw, and the team, as well as the two hardy bands of fans at either end of the stadium stationed next to the two ginormous overhead scoreboards, were absolutely blooming thrilled with the result. On the way to this semi-final berth, Liverpool had defeated opposition from Romania, the Czech Republic, Greece, Italy and Portugal, and I'd been lucky enough to gain a ticket and a travel package via Towns Travel of Liverpool due to my previous trips with them. To watch Liverpool and FC Barcelona's cathedral of football was as much of a dream as watching the Reds at the Parc des Princes or the Stadio Olimpico, and now I was guaranteed to follow these footballing dreams, and so soon after visiting Rome's Olympic Stadium. I vividly recall being on a date in nearby Shrewsbury when my telephone rang and Towns Travel confirmed my place, details, as well as the match ticket price rising from the original quoted £25 to an eye-watering £60. £60 in 2001, wow. All notions of everlasting romantic love were obviously nixed on this particular date, as all I could think of was the Camp Nou, empty and imposing, full, loud and vibrant, as well as La Ramblas, the nearby beach, my day stopover in Salou before the game, and my overwhelming dreams and desires to visit La Sagrada Familia and Barcelona's iconic and surrealistic unfinished church. Unlike on my previous adventures with towns travel, I had booked a day package that included a free day before the match itself, and here we stayed in the nearby and beautiful coastal town of Salou and arrived after lunchtime on the 4th of April. I spent the afternoon and evening mostly alone, first with many long rambling coastal and beachside strolls in the melting sun, and with seemingly the entirety of the town to myself and the few hundred or so fellow Reds on the trip. I barely saw anyone else, not even the locals, who were far too busy with their siestas and precious familial time. Even in the evening when I went in search of televised European football in a bar, it was ghostly quiet save the quiet din of Liverpudlians quietly enjoying life. I had the great pleasure of meeting two lifelong best friends from Liverpool. Regular readers of these articles will be only too aware that names are now a long ago memory lost to the mist of time. But we shared a few drinks with the televised football before joining up together in the morning for our afternoon exploration of the city of Barcelona. 22 years on, the three distinct memories I have of our afternoon dash around Barcelona are: 1. La Rambla simply wasn't explored enough, but the odd beer was consumed in various bars along the way. 2. The Sagrada Familia was everything my Salvador Dali obsessed spirit wanted it to be. And 3. I ventured into a Lacoste shop, as well, when in Spain, you do as the Spaniards do. And I didn't come out for a long time. And my two Liverpudlian pals had waited for me. Looking back, I wished, even then perhaps, that I should have forgone the beauty of Salou for the footballing beauty of the guided tours of Barcelona's Camp Nou home. Over the years since, I've seen so many accounts of how the tour is simply out of this world, but the Camp Nou is not going to go anywhere, so never say never. La Sagrada Familia was everything I hoped for, and another reason for a return trip to this magnificent city, but we duly boarded the early coaches for the transfer to the ground, and I marvelled at the flags being waved from seemingly every window as the fleet of coaches guided us towards Barcelona's very own Coliseum. It was early evening and some 3 hours before kick-off, but the din as we slowly approached the stadium was not of fervent Barca Ultras, but of the local inhabitants. Flags waved from every conceivable window, horns blaring, and a very definite welcome was laid out before us, and we were still some 180 minutes away from a ball being kicked in anger. As is custom for the away supporters on European nights such as these, the authorities like to ensure the vast bulk of these visitors are safely in the ground before kick-off, and there we were, stationed at the very pinnacle of Camp Nou with the entirety of the city in our collective sights, and after lumbering up an inordinate number of never-ending staircases to get there. As is also custom, and certainly so at Liverpool games, the seat allocated to you doesn't exactly represent where you'll end up sitting. But no matter, I immediately headed for the back row, donned the two Lacoste jumpers I'd purchased on La Ramblas earlier, and was entirely vindicated in doing so. The day's oppressive heat had been replaced by a very cold evening, and from our open top position at the top of Barcelona's very own Everest, it was a cold evening up there. But I was warmed by a dour defensive display from the Reds in the all-white, and the surreal table football being played out a long, long way away, and regardless, a footballing dream had truly come true. The aforementioned defensive quartet of Hencho, Hippier, Babel and Carragher snuffed out the best Barca could muster, and a Spanish side containing a future Reds goalkeeper in the shape of Pepe Reina, and a Harlem Globetrotters-styled all-star team of marquee names such as Frank de Boer, Sergi, Puyol, Pep Guardiola, Luis Enrique, Marc Overmars, Patrick Kluivert and the dangerous Brazilian Rivaldo. With future captain Steven Gerrard swamping the midfield with Dietmar Hamann, the Reds snuffed out Barcelona all evening, and whilst I don't remember Liverpool posing any real attacking threat all night, neither really did Barcelona, and the game ended in a very pleasing stalemate at 0-0. This would mean a one-game shootout in effect to reach the final in Germany, and a one-game shootout played out in the Reds' home of Anfield. We made a very bumpy landing back into Speke Airport, still a few months away from being renamed Liverpool John Lennon. As much to the amusement of my two Liverpudlian friends, I hit the proverbial roof as the bouncy, hard landing shook me violently from my sleeping state. A couple of weeks' work lay ahead, as well as the bragging rights of having watched the Reds at the Camp Nou, and 2 weeks later I was standing in the back corner of Liverpool's Cop End, and that was bouncing to and way before kick-off. It's so easy to remember the victories, but I remember this night so vividly. The sheer intake of breath all around the Kop as Rivaldo's early 40-yard screamer, football cliché alert, swerved and curled and dipped just over Sander Westerveld's crossbar in the Liverpool goal. It was the shock and audacity for Rivaldo to even try such an effort, and there was an audible sigh of relief as Westerveld fingertips the shot brilliantly over the bar. So too as Luis Enrique screwed a shot just past the post, and I distinctly remember the quiet every time Barcelona attacked. There were barely any Spaniards in the crowd. Their allocation was barely 1,000 tickets, but their section wasn't completely full either, which surprised me on such a huge occasion. And so every time Barcelona had the ball and they controlled vast swathes of the game, it was eerily quiet and tension-filled. The night's winning goal and the goal that sent the Reds to the UEFA Cup final in Germany came from a Patrick Kluivert handball that was as ridiculous as it was obvious, and Gary McAllister coolly scored the resultant penalty kick and just 1 minute before half-time. Steven Gerrard almost scored a second goal after the half-time break, but I still vividly remember the hushed silence descending all around Anfield whenever Barcelona had the ball. The Reds were 20 minutes, 15 minutes, 10 minutes away from a first European final in 16 years, but as soon as Barcelona attacked, it was eerily and nervously quiet. A goal for the visitors would send them to the final on away goals, and I remember the explosion of joy and sound and utter relief when the referee blew his full-time whistle, and the Reds, against the odds in a season where they continually overcame such odds, were off to Germany for their first European final since 1985. These closing words could seem embellished after some 22 years, but I remember so much from that explosion of noise on the final whistle, celebrating like never before and jumping around and into the arms of my travelling companions, and Charlie in particular, who I'd already arranged to travel with to Germany if the Reds made it to the final. The Kop end was actually bouncing. It was trembling underfoot, quite literally, and I've only experienced such surreal footballing joy as that on a handful of real, distinct occasions. This was very definitely one of them. As was my thinking as I calmed down a little and waited to exit Anfield. I was here. I was stood on the Kop the night the Reds of Liverpool defeated, fairly and very squarely, the might of Barcelona, Rivaldo, Guardiola, Puyol, Enrique and all. I also vividly remember walking along Walton Breck Road, a road that runs parallel behind the Kop end, and the singing and chanting and the vibrant display of emotion everywhere in that packed road. I also remember thinking that I was here walking along this famous road after seeing Liverpool win a semi-final of a European competition, and that I was as guaranteed as possible and eligible for a cup final ticket. Just 5 weeks later, I was indeed clutching that precious cup final ticket in a German city called Dortmund, and ahead of the game that would soon be known around the footballing world at the time as the greatest European final of all time. Chasing the Impossible and a Sword of Damocles. I'm very proud of this book as a motorcyclist roars by. And here I am in Ironbridge. This place beguiles me. It's in a different time zone, a different century, and I blooming adore this place. And this isn't the greatest of angles. I almost read that, but I'm going to forgive myself. And I'm going to leave you from the beautiful confines of the River Severn and beautiful Ironbridge in peace and in solidarity. And I truly, sincerely thank you for watching. Peace, everyone.